Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6:30, and I will call this regular meeting of the Burnsville City Council to order. It is our tradition to stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, and we invite you to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have announcements for our upcoming meetings, and we have two proclamations. Regular council meetings are scheduled for Tuesday, May 7th and Tuesday, May 21st at 6:30 p.m. And we have a work session that's scheduled for Tuesday, May 14th at 6:30 p.m. And we have two proclamations. One I'll do here and the other I'll do at the other side, so I can also give it to our Convention and Visitors Bureau Executive Director, Mrs. Amy Burrell. The first proclamation is for Earth Day and Arbor Day, April 27, 2013. Whereas Burnsville has taken great pride in the quality of our natural environment, including the beautiful shade trees and native plants that enrich our lives in many ways. And whereas we need to practice safe environmental approaches in managing our forests, lakes, wetlands, and open spaces. And whereas Burnsville promotes development and maintains or enhances economic opportunity and community well-being while protecting and restoring the natural environment. And whereas the purpose of Earth Day, Arbor Day celebration is to emphasize the importance of preserving our natural environment through sustainable activities such as recycling, waste reduction, and resource conservation. And whereas Burnsville recognizes the need to protect and preserve the beauty of our community by promoting good stewardship of our natural environment for future generations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Elizabeth B. Couts, Mayor, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim April 27, 2013 as Earth Day and Arbor Day in the city of Burnsville. In celebration of Earth Day and Arbor Day, a community tree sale and native plant sale will be held on Saturday, April 27, 2013 at 7:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Information on sustainability, composting, and water quality will be available at the tree sale. We encourage the entire community to participate, proclaimed this 16th day of April 2013. This next proclamation is for Tourism Awareness Week. And present with us this evening is the Executive Director of our Convention and Visitors Bureau, Amy Burrell. Whereas the travel is among the largest private sector employer in the United States, supporting 14.4 million jobs in 2011, including 7.1 million directly in the travel industry and 6.9 million in other industries. And whereas tourism in Minnesota is 11.9 billion, with a B, billion industry employing more than 238,000 people with state and local tax revenues of $769 million. Whereas tourism in Burnsville continues to play a vital role in the economic well-being of our community, and whereas tourism in Burnsville provides full-time and part-time employment for citizens of our city. And whereas the Burnsville Convention and Visitors Bureau has dedicated itself for 26 years to stimulating visitor traffic to Burnsville area, creating income for both the hospitality industry and the general business community. And whereas the city of Burnsville takes great pride in the hospitality it shows its guests. Now, therefore, I, Elizabeth Couts, Mayor, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim the week of May 4th through 12th, 2013 to be Tourism Awareness Week in the city of Burnsville, and urge all citizens to honor and celebrate this special event, proclaimed the 16th day of April 2013. Mrs. Amy Burrell, if you could come forward, I'd like to present the proclamation to you. Marty is right here.
Marty's here.
Ready on three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1 more. 3, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Yes. The next item on our agenda is citizens' comments. This is the opportunity for anyone in the audience to address the council on an item that is not on the printed agenda and not an application form that will be coming before us at a future date. Please come forward, give us your name and address for the record.
My name is Chris Peterson, and I live at 11926 Somerset Lane here in Burnsville. I've lived here for about 25 years, and I own 4 rental properties here in Burnsville. And there's been a new rental fee put into place this year, and I have 2 properties that are up for renewal this month. So I started filling out my paperwork, and I contacted the city of Burnsville as the fee schedule was a little confusing. And after talking with them, they told me that I was going to have to pay $1,100 this year in rental fees. And I was a little shocked by the fees. And I'm not sure what committee came up with those fees or how the numbers were arrived at.
We spent almost a year, and we had people in the industry help us with coming up with the ordinance that we have and the fee structure. And this was agreed upon by a lot of the apartment building owners who were part of that process, and they thought it was fair. So, Ms. Faulkner, do you want to speak to the item, please?
Madam Mayor, if I can just ask a question, I'm guessing a conversion fee is part of your fee schedule, because for 4 units, if they're all single family, which is the highest classification fee, I'm not quite sure how the $1,100 came to be. So I'm guessing you have properties that have not been previously licensed?
Well, we're licensed. I've owned the properties for many years, so they are licensed. I have 3 duplexes and a 4-plex.
Oh, so it's more than 4 units?
Yeah, well, it's 4 buildings.
4
10
buildings,
units
okay.
total.
Okay, then that would make sense.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, you're correct. We sent notices to everybody when we went through this process who had a rental license to come and participate and be a part of this. We studied what other cities have in the metro area for fee structures and came up with something in the middle. From the public input, we changed the fees and modified them according to the input that we did receive at the time. So it was, as the mayor said, a very thorough process.
And there were many work sessions and input from property owners at this meeting. So I'm not sure, because it was also in the paper. This Week wrote, I'm not quite sure, Mr. Gessner, I think you wrote about 3 articles about it from its inception to its adoption. So it was in the paper as
Yeah.
well.
I guess I did know there was going to be more licensing and fees along with that. I wasn't really aware of what exactly the fees were going to be. I don't know if they were listed in the paper, what the fees were going to be. But when I did find out what they were, and like I said, I was shocked at what they were, I thought, well, let me do some research, and I'll call around and see. And I kind of, if I can pass these out.
Thank you.
Actually, can I have one of those?
Of course.
So I made some phone calls, and as you'll see I don't think I have enough for everyone, but I'll kind of go over it. Eagan, Apple Valley, Lakeville, Shakopee, and Inver Grove Heights have no fees. Richfield, Bloomington, and City of Minneapolis charge a per building fee plus so much per unit after that. And according to Richville, Bloomington, and City of Minneapolis's fee structure, for my fourplex, it would be $100 and some, anywhere from $119 to $196. City of Burnsville is $110 per unit for my fourplex, which would be $440. And the duplexes were in line with the fees of Richville, Bloomington, and City of Minneapolis, but my fourplex, I feel like, fell through the cracks someplace. The fees at $440 are not making any sense according to the apartments or what other suburbs are charging.
Ms. Faulkner?
Madam Mayor, the fee for multifamily, if they're in the same building, I assume all these units are in the same building, it should be $130 per building and $10 a unit. So there's probably a miscommunication there if they are in fact all owned by the same people and in the same building. We set up the fee structure to be modeled after other cities, as you've commented on.
Okay, well,
Mrs. Peterson, I'm going to ask you to work with Mrs. Faulkner and resolve that issue in terms of the fee structure. We did adopt the fee structure, and it is what we have, and it was promulgated last year, and it went into effect in January.
yes. And I
So-
certainly can do that. It seems like there's a lot of confusion about the new schedule because I called up and I said, I'm not understanding the fee schedule, and I said I have 3 duplexes and a fourplex, and she clearly told me it was going to be $440 for the fourplex.
Okay. We'll have you speak with Mrs. Faulkner, and Mrs. Faulkner, if you have your card, and you can exchange it with Mrs. Peterson, because I think this looks like something that can be resolved.
Okay,
There's probably
and in the
some-
future, should I direct all questions to
Yes,
her and
to Mrs.
also
Faulkner.
other landlords? Because there seems like there's a lot of confusion going on with the fees and also with the inspections.
Yes, Mrs. Faulkner would be the
Okay.
person that you speak with. At this
Okay.
point, we've already adopted the fee schedule.
Okay,
And did a lot of work around it, but to understand it and to get better communication between you and our staff on what you owe, I think that would be much better served in terms of resolving
Okay.
the issue.
okay. Okay.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming in and sharing it, and so we can help you resolve the issue. Is there anyone else to speak to this item? Seeing no one, we will move on. The next is emergency items to be added to the final agenda, and it's only for emergency items only. Mr. Albrecht, is there any emergency items to be added?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Okay, members of the council? Okay, we'll go to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a group of items that's considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. However, an item can be removed from the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes an item on the consent agenda to be removed for a separate discussion and vote? Mr. Albrecht,
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
members of the council.
I and J, please.
Councilmember Coughlin asks I and J to be removed for a separate discussion and vote. May I have a motion for the balance, please?
Second.
Motion was made by Councilmember Keeley. Was that Councilmember Keeley who made the motion? Okay.
A long way down here.
Yeah, I didn't hear you, sir.
Speak up.
Yeah. Councilmember Keeley made the motion, second by Councilmember Coughlin. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. Councilmember Coughlin, I is a resolution to accept the bid and award the contract for the 2013 street reconstruction project for 12th Avenue area, West Preserve, City Hall parking lot, and the park improvements, and the sewer cleaning and televising.
I pulled I and J simply because there was such a significant savings on the bids to our citizens that I asked city staff to speak to it and explain to our citizens that that cost savings will be passed on to the citizens in the form of a lesser assessment or lesser cost for the construction.
Okay. And you would like both of these items to be taken together because J is the award of the contract for the 2013 street reconstruction for Friendship area and parks improvement.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Albrecht.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Coughlin, yes, we did have very good news this year. As you're aware, when we do our reconstruction projects, we use prices from the previous year bids to estimate what our anticipated costs are for the upcoming year. We opened bids on 4 projects actually last week, and 3 of the 4 projects came in significantly under the estimates, primarily due to savings of the street reconstruction costs. Paving costs were excellent last week, and what that's going to translate into 2 benefits for the city. One, to those residents on the 2 projects that you mentioned, we'll see a lower per foot assessment rate. That rate will be readjusted this summer as we project what the actual costs will end up being. And then there'll be twofold savings in that our infrastructure trust fund will also see a reduction in costs, which will allow the council some flexibility in doing more streets in future years and being able to parlay that savings into additional reconstruction quicker so that we can get through some of our problem areas.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Would you like to make a motion for I and J, please?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Sherry makes a motion, second by Councilmember Coughlin, and this is for item I and J. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay, and a motion carries. Thank you very much. We're at the regular agenda, and the first item on the regular agenda is the item for the Burnsville Performing Arts Center contract process update and recommendation. Mr. Sal Mondelli, Chair of the Burnsville Performing Arts Center Commission, and Mr. Mark Pavin, Vice Chair of the Burnsville Performing Arts Center Commission, is present. Mr. Mondelli, good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of council, it's a privilege to be here. Tonight, it's hard to believe that we are well into our the 5th year of the operation of the Burnsville Performing Arts Center. And as people in the audience probably don't know, that the policy of the city is to put out the bid at least every 5 years for a services contract, which did happen. An RFP was put together and released in December of 2012. And we formed an RFP committee, which consisted of 8 individuals, 3 members of the Performing Arts Center Commission, and 5 members of the city staff. There were 3 companies that showed interest in responding to the RFP. 2 actually responded on the due date of January 10th. One was the incumbent VenueWorks, and another one was another firm, LHR. And the RFP committee evaluated both of those proposals, and both of those respondents were brought in for oral presentation. They each spent about 2 hours with the RFP committee, and the RFP committee evaluated the pros and cons of both of them, and then unanimously recommended that to the council that VenueWorks be awarded the RFP. And just kind of as a thumbnail sketch on both of those, the pros and cons of both respondents, VenueWorks had obviously a track record here with us. They had very strong financials and industry backing. There were some concerns about, over the past few years, the amount of corporate support that we received from VenueWorks that's visible, and some of the things about alternate revenue sources. On the other side, LHR had a bid. They really are their experiences in hotels and bringing in shows and acts into hotels. And so that was a positive. Maybe some more things with weddings that they'd done in country clubs, et cetera. But there really were two concerns on their side that were pretty significant. One, that they did not have in their bid the name and their resume of a potential executive director. And the second, their strategy on booking acts is to go directly to the talent, which may work in a hotel or in a country club, but doesn't work to try to fill a 1,000-seat theater. And they had no responses there. So those bids were reviewed by the commission members. The BBAC Commission had the opportunity to talk to Heather Johnston, as well as the members of the commission who had been on the RFP team. We met in our normal meeting last Wednesday evening and did another review and had a discussion about that, and voted unanimously 9-0 to recommend the RFP committee recommendation to the council of retaining VenueWorks based on the responses and the oral presentations.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Mondelli? Councilmember Keeley, did you want to ask any questions?
I did not have any questions of Mr. Mondelli.
Okay. Mr. Mondelli, thank you for the work that you and the commission have done on this item. It has been a heavy lift, and we directed you to do this work. And I look at the background of the people that you assigned from the commission to do this work. And these are people who are in the industry and really understand what they needed to do. At the same time, we received the submittals, and I believe that each and every one of us have gone through those submittals. And what you have reported on in terms of the strengths and the weaknesses and your recommendation. And yes, LHR did not have any industry standards. My question now to you and to also our Chief Financial Officer, in each of the years that VenueWorks has been our executive director and manager of the facility, have they met expectations?
Well, I guess it's according to how you look at the
Well-
criteria. If you look at the financial expectations, obviously the first few years were a little bit rocky. And I would put that under, again, when I wasn't involved. We weren't involved in that except for the last 3 years. I would put that into a couple of categories. And, well, we've obviously changed executive directors, so there were some issues there. But at the same token, no matter who was running that facility, you need first couple of years just to have the booking agents and the talent. I mean, you don't want to put yourself on the line and come to a town and waste a date and find 300 people show up at the facility because nobody knows it. So it takes a little time to kind of find your voice, if you will. But you look from a financial, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head now, but I think the first year financial performance was a loss of about $540,000. The second year was somewhere in the 430, and we've gone now 350 was 250 last year. And the latest projection as of our meeting last Wednesday, based on the March financials and looking forward, is for $239,000 for this particular calendar year, and that's with a lot of runway to go. Now, it presumes some things will happen, and we presume that they will also. So I would have to put my English on it, I'd say we will significantly beat the forecast that we had on the budget, as well as perform better than we did last year. So from that perspective, if you look at the most recent run rate, and I would say the last 2.5 years, I would have to say the answer to your question is yes.
So from a business perspective, we're going in the right direction.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things when I look at Mr. Pavin is he is an industry expert in the entertainment and the theater. And I know that when we saw his resume, when he came in to apply for the job as one of the commissions, he gave us his resume and we appointed him. The other is Mr. Gay, and he's also an industry expert, and he's with the university, isn't he?
They both run large facilities, both in the Twin Cities and other places, food and beverage, and have been very instrumental in helping with some of the discussions there. I know Mr. Pivan procured 3 frozen custard machines for the facility.
Yes.
So we have one that works, and we have 2 for parts and things like that. So again, it's another thing with alternate revenue sources and trying to up the food and beverage.
Okay, so we're continuing to do that. And Mrs. Kathy Cleveland is an industry expert also in the marketing area with the company that she works with. So you were confident with the members of the commission that you appointed to this?
I was.
Okay. And again, with our staff, we had our city manager and our CFO, and we had our finance director, and also a community service manager who works with our manager in terms of all of the volunteers at the theater. And then JJ, because he is our facilities manager for the city, needs to be very much engaged in all of them. So all of the people who were part of that interviewing process, all were appropriate people who understood what the different, and they would interview from a different lens, from all of the different lenses.
Sure.
Okay.
That'd be correct.
All right. Very good. And so the commission's recommendation is for us to stay with VenueWorks and continue to keep the business climate stable and continue to improve.
with one proviso that we go and negotiate a contract with some different terms and conditions, and it has to do with today we pay a flat monthly rate as a fee, and what we're recommending is break that apart, and the RFP commission will come up, committee will come up with a percentage, so that we'll pay a lesser percentage on a monthly rate, but some of the other percentage would be based on hitting milestones. For instance, improving the revenues, getting some naming rights, some different revenue sources, and having less dark days in the theater.
Okay, so you're asking us that here's the recommendation, and here are some things that you would like for us to have you and your team go back and negotiate, and then come back with a contract.
We think that that's in the best interest of everybody involved. It has some, some upside for the respondent, VenueWorks, and it has some protection for the citizens in the pocketbook here in the city of Burnsville.
Okay, very good. Sounds good. It sounds like you have a plan in place. Council Member Coughlin.
Mr. Mandelli, my understanding is that the present contract is a 3-year with a 1-year and a 1-year renewal. Do you have any opinion as to if we went to a 2-year with a 1-year, 1-year, 1-year renewal?
Sure. I think that would be appropriate. I think, going to a 1-year, I'm not sure that's fair to VenueWorks.
About a 2-year with a...
With a relook, which I think was in the original. The original contract was a 2-year one, because I know the commission got in place in July, and we had like 90 days to make a decision, and we opted to not do that.
And would it be fair to say you don't see that as unreasonable if that is an idea?
Would not.
Councilmember Sherry.
Madam Mayor, would we then have further voice as to the contract itself?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Everything comes to us in terms of, if we want to do that, we could also have a process, Councilmember Sherry and Mr. Mandelli, that we can put down, and with Mrs. Johnson, when we look at all of that, we should have a recommendation, and then we should take a look at it at a work session. Mr. Albrecht.
Yes, if the council wanted to have a formal review of the contract, we would recommend, instead of negotiating a contract, having it signed and bring it to the council for approval, that we would negotiate a contract, then bring it to the council for input and approval prior to adoption, and then it would come back again for the council for final approval once it's signed. So you'd actually have 2 stages then.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question for Mr.
Yes.
Mandelli. You said you didn't think a 1-year contract would be fair. Why do you say that?
Well, they've invested a lot in here, and I think if you try to reward that, they were the only respondent that really was, met all the requirements, and I wouldn't change that. And we did a 2-year one last time, so I think that would be appropriate to keep that.
Well, then let me tell you why I asked that question, and that is, when I came on council, that was then the first year of operation of the BPAC. And indeed, those first few years were rocky. The complaints that I would take were just overwhelming. Since Mr. Luther has been here, it's been wonderful. He's done a wonderful job. We don't know how long Mr. Luther is going to be here. So I really am very concerned that the performance of VenueWorks is highly tied to Mr. Luther's presence here.
I think, Councilmember Sherry, one of the things that we could do is that if there is a change, that we would be part of that. The contract now can reopen. I mean, those are things that we can always have in the contract, and it's not unusual to have that. The thing is, I believe, with the first executive director, ask for the change.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Like every day.
Yeah. But the thing is, one of the things that I think we need to do now is to really look at create that stable business environment for the facility to succeed. And that's what any business would want, is to create a stable environment and then to continue to improve. So I think we can put a condition in the contract, if there is a change, that the contract is open again. Mrs. Johnson.
Negotiations there's 3 responses, right? You can either accept, reject, or counter. So
Yeah, and-
you can keep going on that until you come to an agreement.
Yes.
Madam Mayor,
Mrs. Johnston.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sherry, there is in fact a provision in the current contract that allows us to approve the director. So
I'm sorry.
the current contract that we have does have a provision in it that allows the city to approve the VenueWorks choice for a director, executive director. So.
I guess I'm not as worried about the choice for director as the continuation of the contract.
And that's fair, and I think...
I think it's fair given the history we've
Absolutely.
had
Yeah.
with this company, and I want to be very honest about that.
Yeah, and I think it has...
And here's where I'm coming from. You used the word lenses. When I was, and I say this a lot, I find myself doing this, so when I served on the Planning Commission, I recognized that, and there were times when I was disappointed when council didn't go with our recommendations. Because we had done our homework, we had done our best, we had gone over all kinds of, detail. Just as the BPAC Commission has done with this. Once I took the seat here, what I realized is you look through different lenses here. You're looking through the lens of your obligation to the taxpayer, and you're also looking through the lens of the phone calls and the emails you're going to get about complaints about something. And so it changes how you look at what a commission has presented to you. And the expertise of this commission is awesome. There's no debate about that. There's no debate about that. But I am concerned that they don't have those lenses and that they don't have the history of the complaints that we've had. I don't want to go back to those
No,
days.
and nobody wants to. And that's the reason I said that we want to continue to create a stable business environment and move forward. We're going to have
Yeah,
complaints.
but as a follow-up to that, I would say that one thing that when you get from something from planning, you get it from parks, or you get it from EDA, you see what they've seen. We see what they've seen. We have not seen what you saw. We've gotten the proposals, and that's it.
But we did not, and it's the same thing with, for instance, Mr. Albrecht just spent $6 million for all of our contract work. We don't see any of that. But we have a great process in place.
We have professional staff, paid staff members.
That's right.
Now, the commissioners are professionals, but they're not beholden to us.
But they care just as much about the community.
Of course they care.
And
And
that they're
that's not the
doing,
issue.
and they did their due diligence. So I don't think there's a difference. in
I
all
just
of that.
feel a bit in the dark, is what I'm saying. I'm feeling a bit in the dark.
Okay. Well, I have looked
Mayor,
at this, and yes, Mr.
I just
Montelli.
make 2 comments. One is, we followed, and every group followed the RFP process to the letter, and we came forward with, and probably gave at least one of the respondents a little more leeway than maybe was required. So we vetted this pretty well, and so you can make whatever decision you like. I was just saying we found that there was one respondent who met the requirements and one who did not, and then it really is about contract negotiation, which you can put anything you want. And the other thing I'd make is you got to be careful, I think, to look at complaints that were 3 years ago
Yes.
and not the last 18
No,
or 24 months.
But I don't, absolutely, and I think I made that clear when I started to speak, and that was that we haven't had any because of the current manager, and I don't want to go back to those days.
Nobody does.
Nobody does, but we could.
Nobody would want to go back. Councilmember Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I want to echo some of the concerns Councilmember Sherry has. What we're really talking about here is the current success of the facility is riding on the back of a gentleman sitting in the audience, Brian. And I think it's become abundantly clear that we have the right executive director, and he has been able to change things dramatically in that facility. The The question is, does he have the right company behind him to provide the tools to ensure that it continues on this path? And I think based on what he's done, there's evidence that says that supports that, even though there's some areas that we absolutely positively have identified that are weak with VenueWorks, the private corporate events and concerts. I think they can do better. There's something that is very clear to all of us. They're outstanding when it comes to plays and theater. That is clearly in their wheelhouse. They do an exceptional job with it. We need all three stools or legs of that stool maximized for us to hit the numbers that we expect. And I think it's all pretty much common knowledge now that the number we expect is a zero operating loss, period. Gone are the days when we're going to accept $200,000 losses, $250,000 losses. I just don't believe that there's a stomach for it. But even aside from that, I don't believe that there's anyone that really believes that that is really acceptable. And I've heard it from the commission themselves that there's a belief that this can be a zero operating loss facility. We may never make money from an operation standpoint, but we sure as heck should not accept anything less than a zero. And I think Brian's the right person to take us there. I want to make sure that in any contract negotiation that the company behind Brian is going to help and give him the tools to get us there. And, we're kind of inching our way there. We're not getting there with any real significant, we're not traveling that road as quickly as we'd like. We're sort of scratching our way there. In any way we need to get there, we'll get there. But there's definitely some things in this contract negotiation that have to change from the first one, and I believe that the commission has addressed those. And I want to, if I may, if you'd like to, I don't know if anybody want to comment on that. I wanted to refer to my work session comments, if that's okay.
Yes. Councilmember Nguyen, did you want to comment before you make the comments on your work session?
I just want to reflect back because I'm sure that's what we're waiting for. It's like the elephant in the room is my comments at the work session.
Yeah. So, Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's clear, and I want to thank the Commission and the review team for all of the work that they did. I believe that the process was fair and thorough, and that you spent a significant amount of time interviewing and discussing the recommendations. I feel most importantly, again, as you pointed out, that, Madam Mayor, that these are experienced individuals on the Commission and on the review team that have expertise in the industry and whose sole interest really is the success of the Performing Arts Center. And I feel very strongly, I agree, I think that reviewing the background and looking at the results of the recommendations, I think it's clear that VenueWorks is the most qualified vendor for us. And things are looking much, much better in the last year or two, I think. It's very appropriate to incorporate some of those performance metrics that you had mentioned. And I think that it would be useful for the council to review the contract at a work session and then move to approval. My concern is, and Councilmember Sherry, you alluded to this, but I really feel strongly about this, that what kind of message are we sending if we interfere with this process? I feel that, again, that this recommendation is fair and thorough, and I think that, in my opinion, we should move forward with that.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Keeley?
Thank you. I want to touch on what you respond to in a way, what you brought up, and I'm not in disagreement. I'm going to take responsibility for why we did what we did, and I think we made an error in judgment. And this is what was driving my desire for the council to be in front of the applicants to see and hear what the commission and the other members of that group saw. First and foremost, we're the elected body, and we answer to the taxpayers, and they own this building. And unfortunately, and I'll take responsibility, I should have foresaw essentially how things were going to play out and made a suggestion at the time back in, what was it, December? Was that when we set this?
November and
motion?
December, someplace.
Late November. And I just didn't think ahead. And I'll take responsibility as a senior member of this council, along with the mayor. I should have thought about this process. And here is the issue. We, based on the nature and the severity of this decision, I should have suggested back then that when we set this process up, recognize that we had an outgoing council member who was the liaison, would have a brand new council member sworn in who would be energetic, but also be being force-fed an enormous amount of new information and overwhelmed. And unfortunately, Councilmember Wooden wouldn't have all the history that the mayor and I would have. If I could do it over, I would have suggested then that the mayor and I participate with the three commissioners and staff and go through this process.
No.
Someone
It would have been.
or two of these people at this dais should have been in that process. And that's what made me feel at the work session when I commented that, I mean, it has nothing to do with the commission and the process. Everything was done exactly as we set out. What we set out was the wrong process. And I regret it because I should have thought through that. And putting Councilmember Wynn, who ended up being on vacation, but had you even been there, it would have been, I think, too much to say. Here, throw you in there and say, come out with and represent the council. You have no history with this whole process. So that was unfair. Having no council present is what really irked me and bugged me, and it's my own fault. I should have brought it up. So for that, I really wanted us to have an opportunity to see and hear what you have said, what you have heard and seen, as Councilmember Sherry pointed out. It does give us a defensible position to answer to the electorate, because we're here at the privilege of the voters, and I didn't want to say that I had no hand in the process of seeing who these folks were. And the reason I had difficulty with that is this is not a road construction contract. We've done those for 40 years.
No.
You know,
91?
This is
91.
91 years.
No,
This-
no, no. 1991.
1991.
1991.
A long time.
We did contracts before that, but maybe not before council. You know, this is the Performing Arts Center. It's a $20 million investment by the taxpayers, for the taxpayers, and this is our first contract renewal, other than the 2-year peak that we did a few years ago. This is a milestone in this facility, and for this council, and for the city. And so for that alone is why I kick myself for not saying something back then.
Yeah.
And now Madam Mayor might be kicking her foot a little
Yeah.
against the other foot, saying, yeah, you're right.
No, and
So-
and you're absolutely right. But we went with our process. Our process is always that. But and I agree. So that's why when we get to the contract, we will have a voice in that.
I want to expand on that if I will. And then I have to back up. I did speak to Mr. Peven, Mr. Gay, and Ms. Cleveland today, because I wanted to reach out to them and let them know where I was coming from. If you will all probably remember, there was some excitement, exhilaration, support, and enthusiasm coming from me when we talked about setting up a BPAC commission. It was absolutely mission critical to me that we have private sector expertise, greater than what any one of us have, sitting on a council, giving us the guidance we need to manage a very new asset and something that is completely out of the wheelhouse of cities. Cities aren't in the business of running private enterprises like performing arts centers. That's just not what they do. What they do is very, very good in streets and safety and programming and et cetera, and parks. I mean, and we have the best. This was a real big ask to say, you know, let's own and run this performing arts center. So I think the commission is priceless. It's invaluable, and I'll say it again. They're rock stars. I said it back then. I'll say it again. Mr. Peven, Mr. Gay, and Ms. Cleveland were absolutely critical in that process. And Sal, had you put yourself on that, I know you stepped out and allowed them to, that would have been even better. So I think the city's interests were well protected by these experts, because in talking with Mr. Peven and Mr. Gay and Ms. Cleveland, we couldn't have had more talent represented from the commission. So I'm not questioning that at all. In fact, I'm very comfortable with what they recommend. They have recommended simply because they are the experts. It really gets to the problem of not being able to be in a defensible position from the council being present, and that is what it is. I'm going to suggest that in light of really all things considered, that we proceed with contract negotiations on no more than a 2-year with some renewable years after that, because I want to make sure that Brian, through this contract process, gets what he needs, the tools that he needs, and we have the metrics and the deliverables in place that we never can go back to what, because I don't either. We took heat galore in many different forms and flavors for a long time. Brian has been a godsend to this facility, and he is the reason it's doing so well. We have to make sure that the company that's behind him for the next 2 years makes sure that he's successful in bringing up those weak areas, the corporate and improving the concerts and maintaining the great job they're doing in theater.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
Madam Mayor, I can support that.
And is that a motion? And then what we can do is to direct our staff to begin putting that contract together and then bringing it, and having the commission being a part of that too. So I don't know if you and the 3 people who sat in those interviews would be part of that.
We'll start with,
but I would
we'll start with the
with the
RFP
4.
team and kind of bubble
Yeah.
up from there.
And then we'll follow. And Mr. Albrecht, the process you would look at the contract, put something together, and then come to a work session where we would talk about that.
Correct, Madam Mayor. I would recommend that in addition to the key individuals on that committee from the BPAC commission, that we'd have the city attorney and
Absolutely.
obviously the new city manager
Yes.
as part of that negotiation team. I don't know that we need the whole commission on that. We routinely negotiate RFPs with consultant services and such that are tied to specific individuals. If they leave, that the city no longer has to work with that group anymore, because oftentimes, just like this, the city hires not just a firm, but a person from that firm that represents, in our minds, the best interest. So we can certainly put that together, and I think we'll look at a schedule that would work for the council at a future work session. We have to look at the BPAC commission and then bring that back in one-on-ones with the council to make sure that you're comfortable with the process and then move forward.
Okay. What I need then is a motion to adopt the recommendation that's put forth and direct our staff to begin work on the contract agreement and bring it to a work session. Councilmember Nguyen makes the motion, second by Councilmember Coughlin. And discussion, Councilmember Sherry.
Nope. I'm,
Button still left.
that was leftover, a leftover button.
Oh, I left her.
So,
Okay, you didn't have a comment?
no,
to make.
but you have a motion and a
And a
second.
second, yes.
Okay, no, ready to vote.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And we have a unanimous vote as well. And Mr. Mondelli, Mr. Peven, Mr. Gay, Ms. Cleveland, thank you very much. And to all of the members of the BPAC, thank you for all of the hard work and for doing such a marvelous job that this business is moving in the right direction. Now it's stabilized the business and continue to improve. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The next item is the ordinance amending Title III, Business Regulations, to add a new change regulation for mobile vendors and amend Title III, Chapter 20 to clarify peddler and transient merchants in relation to mobile vendors and approve the related fees and charges. Mrs. Faulkner, our Community Development Director, is presenting. Ms. Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. As the season is getting closer, and I know it will get warmer someday, right? And these will be back in high demand. We are preparing for mobile vendors and food trucks in the city. So, as you know, we talked about this at a work session, I think, back a couple months ago, back in February, and you gave us direction to proceed with a specific ordinance. We did seek input from a few mobile vendors who were licensed last year and incorporated their comments into this ordinance as well. So I just want to highlight some of the ordinance. All the details are in your background, but The ordinance before you will require a license. It has the same background check and the same fees as our peddlers and transient merchants, so nothing's changing there. We looked at specific locations. We talked to the traffic committee, which is made up of Public Works, police, fire, and the traffic committee really looked at this in detail. And so what they came up with was some parameters where to allow this, and that is not on collector streets or above. These are highly trafficked roads, not in residential areas, and then places that would allow on-street parking so that they would comply with the traffic rules. The number one consideration here is pedestrian safety. There are some exceptions in the residential zones. If someone's having a block party, then certainly if they want to bring in vendors with them, they could allow that. The city does do administrative permits for block parties, so we would be aware of those. And also, if they're catering a private event like a graduation party, if someone wants to bring that in for a temporary event, certainly seemed reasonable. We did also get a request to look at the South Cross area, and after talking with the traffic committee, there really are no viable sites there. There's no parking on most of the streets. Most of them are collector streets. The best place for them to vend is to the employees themselves on the parking lots of the businesses that are there. So they do have options to vend there. It just wouldn't be in the public right-of-way. We just noted to the Planning Commission and EDC that the Department of Health does regulate the food vendors. We are not in the Health Department regulation business, so they will still have to continue to comply with Minnesota Department of Health regulations. They regulate the length of time that anybody can be in a given location. And the proposed ordinance also addresses not only food vendors, but any other types of mobile vendors. We've had a request lately for a mobile cell phone company, for instance, or there could be accessories and clothing. You know, they're just kind of expanding to all different types of merchandise. So our ordinance covers them all. So here's the locations that we came up with, and these are incorporated into the ordinance. They're in heart of the city, where we do allow on-street parking. The first is adjacent to Nicollet Commons Park on 126th Street, and then on the east side of Nicollet, it would be adjacent to, there's a little parking lot there. There's some parallel parking on the street on 125th Street.
Before you move off of that, Ms. Faulkner, I have gotten some inquiry. One of the concerns is that they are saying that vendors can't come and put cones up to reserve that area when they have customers who come and park.
Correct.
So
If I can get to the next slide.
that'll clarify it, because I said yes, I will make sure that will be clarified.
Well, of course, I don't have it here on the slide, so I'll answer your question. I thought I had it. It's first come, first serve in the ordinance. People cannot reserve.
They cannot go out and put cones there and say this is reserved because the truck is going to be coming in and take away the parking spaces. I know that was clear to us, but I'm doing it for the benefit of our business owners, both on 126th and also on 125th, who are saying, what happens if they come in and put cones to reserve the space, and now it's taking parking spaces away from their customers?
Correct, Madam Mayor. That's first come, first serve. They're a parking place. We don't reserve any other public parking places in the city, and we would treat them just the same. It is written in the ordinance that way.
Yeah.
The other performance standards is that the locations have known restrooms, where the restrooms, obviously in the locations that we've selected, it's Nicollet Commons Park, there's public restrooms there, especially when food's being provided. That if they are food vendors, that they provide garbage and recycling cans, so we don't have trash blowing all over. The city's not responsible for cleaning up that trash. We're allowing them 2 parking stalls. Some of these trucks or trailers can get a little big. Again, it's first come, first serve. If there's not 2 available, they would have to move on. The hours are 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. with a half-hour setup takedown on either side of that. We don't want these vehicles stored on residential property, so they have to be stored consistent with any other commercial in commercial areas. The customer windows and access has to face the curbside, again looking at pedestrian safety, and not face the street side. And same as our existing peddlers and transient merchants, no horns, bells, crying out signage, etc. Again, we did get input from the vendors, the known vendors that we have here. In Burnsville, they asked for the private events in the residential area and the South Cross area. We tried to accommodate those as best as we could. The Planning Commission did review this, and they recommend approval of the ordinance. They thought that this was good, and we're prepared for these when they come in the future, and it's consistent with the policies and other ordinances that we have. the Economic Development Commission reviewed this. Their comments related more to bringing vitality into heart of the city. They thought that that was seen as a good thing and an economic development driver. And of course, staff recommends approval. We did research other cities' ordinances to come up with these parameters. And as you know, you have another item on the agenda after this one to talk about vending in the parks.
And for our residents also, that this was also discussed at a work session, and the two vendors who were interested in this particular ordinance were present, and they worked with you, and they said that the ordinance, they agree with it.
Correct. So much so they didn't come to no one spoke at the Planning Commission about this. So.
Okay. Councilmember Sherry.
I just want to compliment you that somebody stopped me. I don't even know who this person was, and expressed appreciation for the sensitivity of the existing operations in the parks. And I said that was your doing, not mine. And thank you very much. I mean, you really thought through all of those angles, and this person was obviously following this. I don't know what his involvement was, but I'm passing on his thanks.
Thank you.
I think it must be the same gentleman who spoke about being sensitive to those who are already vending in the park.
Probably the next aisle at Cub, right? Yeah. You went down one aisle, I was down the other aisle.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Faulkner? If not, a motion is in order to adopt the ordinance.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Councilmember Sherry makes the motion, second by Councilmember Keeley. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. Thank you very much. Well done. The next one is item number 7, and this is to approve the updates to policy 3.045. This is vending in parks, and approve the related fees and charges. Mr. J.J. Ryan is the Recreation and Facilities Superintendent for the city. Mr. Ryan, welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Along with the changes that you've just made with vending ordinances in the right-of-way, we've also been discussing the topic of vending in the parks. And again, the history that you just touched on is we've been before you on 2 separate occasions discussing topics, whether or not it should be allowed or where it should be allowed and who would be impacted, some of our local nonprofits that currently vend in the parks, things like that. We've taken the information that you've provided us. We brought that to the Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting in March. They reviewed the policy and had some more recommendations for us. They finally made a recommendation for approval at their meeting earlier this month. And so we have the draft of that policy before you tonight in your packet. Again, all the necessary folks with the Parks and Recreation Department have seen the draft and are recommending approval. Some highlights in the park vending policy. Again, we do state that vendors must comply with state and city requirements. Again, talking about what Ms. Faulkner mentioned regarding licensing and inspections and things like that. In our policy, we clarify mobile food units and peddlers. For the purpose of this discussion, mobile food units are those food trucks that come in and they'll set up for a day, a few hours, whatever it might be. A peddler would be a vendor that would go from park to park, maybe selling prepackaged food items or ice cream, only stopping to make a sale for a brief period of time and then moving on. So we thought it was important to clarify that, identify the 2 differences, and allow both of those types of vending to happen in the parks. So all vendors will be restricted from the parks during special events or tournaments. So when the BAC is hosting their large soccer tournament, we are not going to dictate to them that vendors are allowed in the parks. They can have the right to negotiate with those vendors. Same thing with the special events or legacy events like the Fire Muster or Art and All That Jazz Festival. They want the right to negotiate whatever arrangements with vendors that they've been working with. One of the other things we mentioned or had a discussion on during one of your work sessions was that vendors cannot sell the same items that we are selling at city-operated concession stands. So we both won't be selling hot dogs and chips side by side, competing for who's a quarter less and things like that. They'll have to come up with their own menu items after we've set our items for the year. So, again, we talked about the mobile food units. One of the earlier discussions we had is that we would allow them to vend in our community parks. After looking a little bit more closely at that, we've identified 13 vending locations in 12 of our community parks. The reason that number drops is that when you talk about some of our community parks like Sunset Pond, although it's a community park, it really doesn't lend itself a good location. There are parking issues, there are maybe pedestrian safety issues there, so we've tried to eliminate those things right away. And really, we've identified 12 parks where there are high numbers of traffic and park patrons, so really probably better locations for our vendors. Another item that we discussed with our the two mobile food unit vendors that came before you is that they would like to operate on a first-come, first-served basis, which is also in line with what Ms. Faulkner has in store for the right-of-way vending. This is what happens in other communities. This is what happens in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and they feel it's the most fair way to do that. It also is very helpful to us in the Park and Recreation Office. That way we don't have to determine or set a calendar of who's going to vend where and when. They're on their own for doing that. They've also told us that they use their social media outlets for identifying, for telling their customers where they're going to be. So it's not incumbent on us to provide that information to our park patrons. And we'd also identified in the policy that peddlers will be allowed to access any of our parks so long as they stay in designated areas where their vehicles can drive. They're not driving through the parks by any means, but driving through parking lots. Again, except for when our concession stands are in operation, because many of the times these peddlers will offer for sale the same food or beverage items that we are offering at those concession stands. So, when it came down to fees, currently we have a $55 daily permit fee. We felt that was in line. It might be, I guess, a little bit high. We kind of heard that last year. But clearly, if we want one of these mobile food units or peddlers to vend in our parks, we'd like them to do that and be available to our park patrons on a year-round basis. So we've also come up with a $500 annual fee. Again, we discussed that fee with the two vendors that you had before you, and both of those vendors seemed to think that that was right in line with what other communities were doing, specifically Minneapolis and St. Paul. The other fee structure that was discussed was kind of using a percentage of profits. The challenge with that, again, is that would be very intensive, labor-intensive for staff to kind of keep track of daily receipts and things like that. So really, an annual fee or a daily fee would be the best way for managing that fee structure for us. Finally, with that, it's important to note that obviously we'll need to review this policy next year and possibly the fee structure again for 2014 and see where we're at. Quite honestly, we really don't know how many vendors will even inquire about vending in our parks. I've had a few phone calls, but more just interest in to see where we're at and what we're doing. So,
okay, thank you, Mr. Ryan. Members of the council, Councilmember Sherry.
Well, just that I spoke too soon. I told Jenny, I complimented Jenny. I should have been complimenting Mr. Ryan. But thank you very, very much. It's really thorough, and you've looked at things I never would have thought of. So thank you.
Councilmember Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When you were going over the fees, it sounded like when you summarized it, it was an either-or.
Correct.
Is it $55 a day for people who want to come in for 3 days, or $500 gives you the whole year?
Correct.
Okay. That, when together, I was saying we're getting a little expensive, but
Correct.
either-or, now I agree. Yep.
It is an either-or.
Yep.
Anything else?
I know, I see what you're...
I think from our work session, you've been aligned with everything that we discussed, so I have no questions. If not, Council, I need a motion to adopt the ordinance before us.
Move to approve.
Second.
Councilmember Keeley makes the motion, second by Councilmember Nguyen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay, and the motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. The next item before us is the appointment of Heather Johnston to the position of City Manager and to approve the employment agreement. Ms. Hanson, Human Resource Director, is presenting. Ms. Hanson, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the council, if you remember at a special work session on April 2nd, you interviewed 3 finalists for the City Manager position and decided to offer the position to Heather Johnston. And then you directed staff to negotiate a contract with her and along with the management consultant that we had. So we have done that, and we're presenting that for your consideration tonight. It's very similar to the employment agreement that we had with our previous city manager, a lot of the same components. If you remember, we did establish a new salary range for that position, and we are proposing to start Ms. Johnson at step 2 of that salary range, which is $139,000. and proposing that she would be eligible to go to the next step in that range after 1 year of employment, given a fully qualified evaluation by the council. All the other components are basically the same benefits that other city employees receive, nothing out of the ordinary. So it's mainly the salary range and the compensation to start her at that would be the decision maker. The recommendation is to appoint her, Heather Johnston, as city manager and approve the proposed employment agreement. And I can answer any detailed questions that you might have.
Okay. Councilmember Keeley?
Thank you. Something came out of this process that I think is worth restating on camera. Could you tell us how our compensation structure compares to other cities as far as complete 100% transparency?
Well, cities do set up their compensation differently. We have put all of the compensation into our salary. Some additional compensation that other cities might have, they might contribute to a monthly car allowance to the city manager. They could make a contribution to like deferred compensation. They might pay the total insurance versus just a portion of it. We have decided to put everything into the salary, make it simple, make it very transparent. Other cities would just have more things that you add up. And so we've decided to keep it simple and very understandable. Other cities are fine as long as they stay below the salary cap that's set by the state. But
the other items included in that aren't necessarily required to stay under that cap, and they are not necessarily always reported. Is that correct?
I don't know the details of that, but they are supposed to be under the cap. Right. Now, with car allowance, you can, the mileage that you drive could be separate, so there are calculations that can be done. But we try and keep it simple so we don't have to do any of that. And
well, I bring this up knowing it, but I think it's very valuable information for our taxpayers to know that when they read in the newspaper the compensation and they might see some comparisons of other cities, that this is the whole amount of compensation, and there isn't any hidden fringe benefits that aren't reported, which happens in other cities.
And when we do our comparison, we always compare what's the average salary and then what's the average total compensation so that we can do a true comparison. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to the members of our community and Councilmember Keeley, we have been very transparent and very simple in the way that we compensate so that everybody understands it, and there's nothing that isn't transparent. And I think that's the gist of some of your questions, because when you're looking at deferred comp and cars and all of those other things, ours is very straightforward.
That puts a feather in the cap of the city and how it's run.
Yeah.
I think it's outstanding.
And we have done that from the beginning, and we do performance evaluations on an annual basis, and so everybody, there is a great deal of accountability from the time that we set up our goals and objectives at the beginning of the year and direct staff to achieve that as deliverables, is how we also evaluate the success of the organization and the city manager. And so everything is very transparent in that regard. Yeah.
And that's why Heather came to work for us a few years ago.
That's true.
And Steve came to work because they wanted transparency.
Yes. Councilmember Coughlin.
I'd also like to point out that Ms. Johnston has agreed to start much on the lower end of our salary range. As I recall, I even shaved $3,000 more off than the proposal was. So she actually is starting lower than what was proposed by the expert at the lowest end of the salary range. So even though it's to all our citizens, it's a reasonable amount of money, she still has agreed to that.
And I think Mr. Gessner, in what he has written in the past about the salary of the city manager, he will see where Mr. Ebling was and where Ms. Johnston is starting. So I think when now citizens see that comparison, they can see how very transparent and accountable and reasonable that we are in all of this. And so first, to Ms. Johnston, thank you so much for accepting the position. And we're very glad that you've decided to put your hat in the ring. And here we are. So, members of the council.
Motion to approve.
Councilmember Keeley makes the motion, and second by Councilmember Coughlin. Second by everybody. Second by everybody. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And the motion carries. Congratulations to our new city manager, Ms. Johnson. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I really appreciate it. I'm very humbled and honored to have this opportunity, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. All right. And I will now recess the Burnsville City Council meeting so the Economic Development Authority meeting can convene. President Keeley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll call the meeting to order of the Burnsville Economic Authority. Note, the commissioners are all present. Do we have any additions to the agenda?
No.
None noted. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Any items off the consent that needs to be pulled? Seeing none, need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilmember Coughlin, seconded by Commissioner Coughlin. Commissioner Sherry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. That concludes the agenda of my first Economic Development Authority meeting. I need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you. Councilmember Coughlin motions to adjourn,
Commissioner.
seconded by Commissioner Wynn. She reminded me to say that. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Commissioners. I now turn the meeting back over to Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Sherry.
Before we adjourn, Madam Mayor, I think we
Can
all...
I reconvene the City Council meeting?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I will now reconvene the Burnsville City Council meeting.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Sherry.
I just would like to thank Steve Albrecht for serving as our interim city manager.
that's right.
He did a fine job, and we are very grateful.
Yes. And before I adjourned, I was going to say, Mr. Albrecht, you did a superb job, and you took us through the transition, and there wasn't a beat that was missed. So thank you. And he did pretty good, didn't he?
Yes,
It was very
very thorough.
very thorough. And right. And we had some, and he got baptized into a 3:40 something a.m. Event that he had to. And then I hear this, my text message go off at 3. I know, who is texting? And it's about an incident that we all receive those texts. So thank you for all of that. So, Ms. Johnson, it's a 24/7 job.
That's all yours.
It's like being a mom.
Yeah. And then, of course, all of the different things that go on that you keep us informed. Thank you very much. Well done.
Yes, thank you.
Well done. A motion to adjourn is in order.
So move.
Councilmember Keeley makes the motion.
I second.
Second by Councilmember Wynn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. And the motion carries. Thank you for being with us, and good night. And thank you, members of the City Council.